My name is Gavin Evans, and this is my review of Passion of the Christ. And this will be a spoil-filled review, so if you haven't seen it, or if you somehow don't know this story, there's your warning. But I've heard some mixed things on this movie. I've heard some people say they love it, it's the best Christian movie to ever exist, and I hear some people hate it. I've heard them call it terrible, and I was curious to see which side I would fall on. I do like Mel Gibson as a director, so I was leaning towards more optimistically, but after watching it, this is not a good movie. And it's very jarring from the get-go because it just feels like you're just thrown into the middle of this story. The movie kind of just begins and you're supposed to know who all these people are, what's going on. Like, if you aren't familiar with the details of it, you will be completely lost. And for the life of me, I don't understand why they didn't begin this movie at the Last Supper. It just seems like the obvious way to open it, but they didn't for some reason. And the movie also begins with this really blue tainted look that really didn't work for me. I thought the first bit of this movie was just ugly. And the characters in the story just aren't set up at all here. You've got Judas's betrayal of Jesus. We see the famous kiss on the cheek, but it has no weight behind it because we don't know anything about Judas or Jesus and why he's betraying him. You're just supposed to know why. And the character of Jesus is just absent here. He doesn't have a lot to say or do. He's just the character that you feel bad for because he's just suffering so much. So there's very little for me to latch on to, and everyone else, it's very difficult to tell which disciple is who because Peter, Judas, they all kind of look alike. And I'm just like, okay, which one is that? Wait, who's this? Just no character has any bit of depth for them. Actually, that's not true. The one character who I was interested in is Pontius Pilate. I probably mispronounced his name, but he was the one character who was actually conflicted on what to do. He didn't want to cause an uprising, but he didn't want to just let Jesus go, and he didn't know what to do, and you can actually see some internal struggle with this character. So he's the one guy to actually work for me. Every other character is as bland and as forgettable as they get. So we get that setup, we get the unfair trial of Jesus, which is infuriating, and it does invoke a strong emotional response. But then after that, the rest of the movie is just Jesus suffering, and I get that's what I signed up for. I get that's the story being told, but without anything to really latch onto at the start, it just feels very empty. Like, we get the occasional flashback every now and again, but I feel like this movie should have been more reliant on them. I think for a 2 hour long movie, it should have shown how good he was, how he tried to help people, and his principles, and actually define him as a character and his disciples, and then also cut back to what's happening now. If you went back and forth, I thought that would be a lot more impactful, because anytime a flashback does occur, it happens for a few seconds and then it just ends. It doesn't feel like a single real scene. And with Jesus' suffering, like, there's a point where it just becomes too much. Like, he's on his way to get crucified. He's got the cross on his back. He falls, he gets beaten, he gets up, then he falls, he gets beaten, he gets up, and you rinse and repeat for what felt like 20 to 30 minutes. That might be an exaggeration, but I'm truthfully not completely sure. And it's just like, okay, we get it. It's brutal, it's terrible what's happening to him, but it's just too much. And there was this one character who gets forced to help Jesus. He doesn't want to, but eventually he does. And there's another character who gives him water, and it's supposed to show the kind people there. And I like that idea that there was some good humanity there, but apparently in the Bible, there was only the guy who helped him carry the cross and he volunteered to. And I think that's a much stronger character beat, so I wish they just did it that way. And I wish we got more moments like that. Like, there's a few where you can see people taking in what's actually happening to this man, but there's just not enough of that. And also, this might be a hot take, but as brutal and as bloody as this movie is, I didn't really find it to be effective at that. Like, you're watching terrible things happen to him, but you don't feel it as much as you could. It exists strictly on an external level, strictly on the surface. Because once again, there's very little to latch onto. There's not much character, and I just feel like that could have been a bit better. The one thing that I thought was really effective, though, was the Crown of Thorns. Like, I've heard about it, I knew about it, I've seen pictures of it, but it didn't really dawn on me until watching this movie what the Crown of Thorns was actually like. Like, when they put it on his head and they digged into his skull, like, that is the most effective scene in the movie. I also wish that, just choosing my words wisely here, but we don't hear him scream. We see him barely move. We see the blood on him, but he doesn't react in a way that allows you to connect. And I understand who he is, but looking at this as a movie, when someone's getting beaten and they're just not screaming and they're just taking it, like, it shows strength, yes, but I think you have to show some bit of pain there too for some more emotion to come through. And anyways, he eventually dies on the cross, and it's tough to, take in, like, what happened is a huge injustice and just brutal that people were killed like this ever, and he dies. And you're just like, okay, and then he comes back, and then the movie ends, and I'm just thinking, well, what was the point of all that? Like, is it just to show the brutality of what happened to him? Because it did that well enough, but I feel like you could have done that in a 30-minute long short film. I don't think you needed an entire movie of that. Like I said, it's common sense to me that they should have relied more on the flashbacks and show how good he was, and that gives more emotional weight to what's going on now, because the flashbacks just didn't have any impact the way they exist, and it just feels like you're thrown into the middle of the story. There's no story, there's no characters. It feels like I'm watching the season finale to a TV show I didn't watch. And also, anytime Satan comes into the movie, it just felt really weird. It felt really out of place. I get what they're going for, but it just doesn't work for me. But look, as hard as I am being on this movie, I do think it's well directed on some levels. Like, the production design, the costumes, all of that is really good. It feels like the time period it takes place in, and it caught me off guard when I found out this movie was in subtitles, but it is, and I think it immerses you in this time period and these people very well by doing that. I think Jim Caviezel does a perfectly fine job with the material he's given to work with. He's not given a lot of character work to do, but he sells you on the pain and suffering that he feels. And then Hristo Nemrov-Shopov, who plays Pontius Pilate, the character who did have depth, he also does a really good job. The rest of the cast, I guess, is fine. I don't really think Mary stands out in any way. Like, she's there, she looks sad as she watches what's happening to her son, but then that's kind of it. So, like, if you know the story and you want to see it, then you'll get that, but you won't get anything more. As an actual movie, I think it fails. I don't think there's enough here narratively, character-wise, thematically, just anything at all. It's just a movie that felt very empty to me, and when it ended, I'm just like, that's it? Recreates the story it's trying to tell well enough. For those who want to love this movie, I'm sure you will. It has some effective moments. I like some of what it's trying to do, but yeah, it's heavily flawed. So I'm going to go ahead and give The Passion of the Christ a 4 out of 10. Okay, have you seen The Passion of the Christ? What did you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for some more videos soon. And Gavin, out.